December 1941. Inside a smoke-filled German staff room, the air is thick with arrogance. Just days after Hitler's declaration of war on the United States, senior officers are laughing. America? A nation of shopkeepers, they scoff. A land of refrigerators, jazz music, and decadent movies. Their people are soft, distracted by consumer trinkets. Their factories are scattered, churning out cars and washing machines, not tanks and bombers. How could such a nation, so vast and so disorganized, possibly challenge the disciplined might of the Third Reich? To them, the decision felt not just easy, but inevitable. The idea of America as a serious military threat is a joke, a footnote in their grand strategy. The war, they believe, is already won. But an ocean away, a different sound is beginning to hum, a low, powerful thrum that will soon become a roar. It's the sound of a promise being kept, Franklin Roosevelt's promise of an arsenal of democracy. In Washington, D.C., the switches are already being flipped. A new agency is taking shape, the War Production Board, led by a man named Donald Knudsen, a former Sears executive who knows how to move mountains of material. And beside him stands another giant of industry, William Knudsen, plucked directly from the presidency of General Motors. His mission? To teach a government how to think like a factory floor, to transform bureaucrats into assembly line managers. The change is rippling across the country with astonishing speed. In Detroit, the great stamping presses that once formed the sleek curves of family sedans are falling silent, one by one. A foreman walks down the line, chalk in hand, and marks the very last 1942 model to roll off. It's a bittersweet moment, the end of an era. But there's no time for sentiment. Already, blueprints for B-24 Liberators are being unrolled on the factory floor. A union steward tacks a notice to a bulletin board, announcing new shifts, around-the-clock production. Overtime is no longer a choice, it's a duty. And in homes across the nation, life is being reconfigured. A young woman who just months ago might have been a sales clerk or a housewife stands before a mirror. She carefully ties a bandana around her hair, not as a fashion statement, but to keep it from getting caught in the machinery. She's heading out for her first night on a drill press, ready to join a growing army of women who will redefine the American workforce. These are the faces of the home front, the human gears in a machine of unprecedented scale. The statistics are staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. After February 1942, not a single new car for civilian use will be built for the duration of the war. Every ounce of steel, every sheet of aluminum, every pound of rubber is now a strategic material. The government clamps down. Gasoline is rationed, tires are rationed, sugar is rationed. The chaos of procurement, with different branches of the military competing for the same resources, is slowly being wrestled into a system of priorities. The machine tool industry, the bedrock of all manufacturing, begins to multiply its output, creating the machines that will build the machines of war. It's a messy, frantic, and often confusing process, but it's working. The giant is waking up. Back in that German staff room, the officers continue to laugh. Their maps of Europe spread out under the soft glow of desk lamps. They trace the lines of conquest, confident in their timetables and their superior engineering. But if they could see across the Atlantic, they would feel a chill run down their spines. In the vast, sprawling plains of the Midwest, a new factory, miles long, is being bolted together. Inside, something is taking shape that no German planner has ever conceived of. It's not just a new tank or a new plane. It's a new kind of war. A war of mass production, standardized, relentless, and overwhelming. A war that will be won not just by soldiers, but by welders, by riveters, by the sheer, unstoppable power of an entire nation turned into a single, colossal assembly line. The reckoning is coming. The glow of a single lamp dissolves into the harsh, even light of 1,000 fluorescent tubes humming over an assembly line. This is where America learned a new rhythm, a new speed. The country wasn't just building things. It was building the process of building things. Welcome to Willow Run. At first, Ford's massive B-24 Liberator plant sputtered. It was a chaotic giant struggling to find its footing, but then the gears mached. The chaos found its cadence. Soon, the noise of rivet guns became a steady, deafening metronome. At its peak, a fully assembled 4-engine heavy bomber was rolling off the line almost every hour. Imagine that. An instrument of immense power, born from nothing in less time than a lunch break. Now, let's head to the coast, to Henry Kaiser's shipyards. Here, the enemy isn't just the axis, it's the tide itself. Teams of welders, many of them women new to the trade, race against the clock. They aren't building a ship piece by piece on the slipway. They're building giant, prefabricated sections, whole chunks of a hull that slide into place like a colossal puzzle. A Liberty ship, a massive cargo vessel, is launched in just days. Think about that entire ship, from keel to deck, built and sent to sea faster than a German U-boat commander could decide on his next target. This is the pattern that began to terrify the Axis High Command. It wasn't about a single genius invention, a wonder weapon. It was about a genius process. It was about scale. Thousands of Liberty ships. Aircraft production climbing from a few thousand a year to tens of thousands. Standardized trucks and jeeps, tough and reliable, pouring out of Midwest factories in an unstoppable flood. And the shockwaves started to hit. Picture a U-boat briefing room in early 1943. The charts on the wall tell a frightening story. For months, the tonnage of Allied shipping sunk had been climbing, a source of pride and proof of their strategy's success. But now, the line on the graph has flattened. Worse, it's starting to dip. The convoys are bigger, the escorts more numerous. New reports mention a strange blip on a screen radar that sees them in the dark, in the fog. The room grows quiet. The era of the happy time for submarine wolf packs is over. They call it Black May. The hunters are becoming the hunted. Let's shift scenes, North Africa. A veteran German officer stands on a ridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He's looking down at an Allied-controlled port. What he sees isn't just a harbor. It's a living organism of logistics. Cranes swing in a synchronized dance, unloading ships around the clock. The docks are stacked high with crates, mountains of supplies that stretch as far as the eye can see. And vehicles. Endless lines of trucks and jeeps move off the piers, forming a steel river flowing inland. He's a professional soldier, a master of logistics himself, but he has never seen anything like it. This isn't a supply chain. It's a force of nature. The story is in the small moments too. The young welder, her face shielded from the blinding arc of her torch, carefully setting aside half her paycheck to send to her brother, who flies in one of the planes she helps build. Back in Germany, a logistics officer sits at his desk, tracing the convoy routes across the Atlantic with a pencil. The lines on the map are thick with enemy ships. Suddenly, his pencil feels small, insignificant, unequal to the task of even tracking, let alone stopping, the tide. This is the turning point, the moment the balance shifts irreversibly. By the middle of 1943, it's no longer a question of if the Americans can catch up to the industrial might of the Axis. The truth, cold and factual, is dawning in Berlin and Tokyo. The Americans are not catching up. They are overtaking. The dawn breaks cold over England. On hundreds of airfields, the hard stands are packed wingtip to wingtip with four-engine giants, B-17s, B-24s. Ground crews swarm over them, a well-oiled machine of practiced routine. They move with an efficiency born not of desperation, but of abundance. A damaged hydraulic line? They replace the whole assembly. A shattered plexiglass nose cone? A new one is already being wheeled out from a crate. There are spare parts for everything, stacks of them, shipped across an ocean that America commands. Across the North Sea, in Germany, it's a different kind of efficiency, one born of crisis. Albert Speer, the Reich's Minister of Armaments, has performed miracles. He's dispersed the factories, scattering them into hidden workshops in forests and tunnels. Machine tools are moved under the cover of darkness. Skilled labor is a dwindling resource, thinned by the endless demands of the front lines. They are replaced by coerced workers from occupied territories, a resentful, exhausted workforce. Speer's production numbers, against all odds, continue to climb. He is a master of improvisation, a genius of industrial triage, but he's fighting a war against a new kind of math. The math is brutal. For every German factory dispersed, America builds two more, larger ones, safe from attack. For every intricate component painstakingly crafted in a hidden German workshop, a dozen more are stamped out on an American assembly line. The German pilot, climbing into his Messerschmitt, knows this math instinctively. He sees the bomber formations darken the sky, and he knows that even if he shoots one down, two more will take its place tomorrow. The equation has changed. The turning point has a name: Big Week, a concentrated week-long assault on Germany's aircraft industry. The losses are staggering on both sides. But here's the difference. The American bombers return the next day. and the day after, and now they have company. At first, they were just specks on the horizon, but soon they became a constant lethal presence. P-51 Mustangs, sleek and silver, fitted with new drop tanks that give them the range to fly all the way to Berlin and back. The hunters have become the hunted. A Luftwaffe group commander, writing in his diary, doesn't need to quote statistics. He just captures the feeling, the dawning horror. For every one of our pilots we lose, it feels like 2 more of theirs appear in the sky the next day. The air war is no longer about skill or courage, it's about replacement. And this industrial might is not just in the air. Look south, to the quiet estuaries and sheltered harbors of the English coast. An entire invasion force is materializing. Rows upon rows of landing craft, strange, flat-bottomed vessels, sit waiting. Enormous, bizarre shapes of concrete and steel lie partially submerged prefabricated harbor sections, code-named mulberries, an entire port, ready to be floated across the channel. This is not just an army. It's an industry preparing to move itself across water. When the landings come, on the beaches of Normandy, the true story isn't in the initial heroic chaos. It's in what happens next. The landings do not stop. The German coastal commander, his guns silenced, his men exhausted, radios back in disbelief. The waves of ships just keep coming. Even after his defenses crumble, new waves arrive, disgorging more men, more machines, more supplies. His dread is palpable. He isn't witnessing a battle. He's witnessing the relentless output of a factory. Behind the front lines, a new landscape blooms. A landscape of logistics. Vast dumps of fuel tins stacked in shimmering, miles-long fields. Pyramids of ammunition crates, stretching as far as the eye can see. Bulldozers, fresh off the boat, carving new roads through the French countryside, creating arteries for the flood of materiel. While German staff officers argue over which desperate sector should be resupplied, which starving unit gets the last few panzer shells, the Allies are arguing about where to build the next supply depot. This is the ultimate weapon, the one Speer could never counter. Not a tank, not a plane, but the simple, overwhelming power of the production line. An avalanche of steel, rolling inexorably toward the heart of Germany. The year is 1944. The Allied armies have stormed ashore in Normandy and are now a torrent sweeping across France. But an army, even a victorious one, marches on its stomach, and its tanks run on fuel. The advance has been so rapid, so relentless, that it has outrun its own supply lines. The railheads, the arteries of modern war, are miles behind the front. This is where a new kind of soldier becomes the hero of the hour. Meet the drivers of the Red Ball Express. Thousands of men, the vast majority of them Black Americans, serving in a segregated army, yet tasked with its most critical mission. They climb into their GMC Jimmy, deuces and a half, and hit the road. There are no speed limits, no sleep. For days on end, they hammer these makeshift routes, marked with red balls on signs, day and night, through rain and darkness. They are a constant, roaring river of steel, carrying everything the front needs: gasoline, ammunition, food, medicine. Their trucks are the lifeblood of Patton's Third Army, the fuel for the fire consuming the Third Reich. Meanwhile, somewhere in a German headquarters, an officer stares at a fuel gauge. It's his job to power the war machine, but the needle only ever moves one way, down. He watches the reserves for an entire Panzer Army dwindle, knowing that for every gallon he has, the Americans have 1,000. He can hear the endless drone of their supply trucks in his mind, a sound more terrifying than their bombers, because it's the sound of a war he can no longer win. Let's look closer at this contrast. Picture a U.S. supply depot, a sprawling city of crates and boxes. A clerk, maybe a kid from Ohio, sits at a desk, his hand a blur as he stamps form after form. 105mm high explosive, stamp, case of 12, stamp. He doesn't count the shells. He counts the train cars they fill. 10 cars, 20 cars, 100. An entire railroad dedicated to feeding a single artillery division. The paperwork is staggering, but it's the grammar of victory. Each stamp is another nail in the coffin. Now, shift to a muddy foxhole on the German side. A battalion commander, a veteran of Stalingrad, isn't counting train cars. He's on his hands and knees, counting individual machine gun belts. He has maybe a dozen left. His men have been ordered to hold this position at all costs. But how do you hold a position when your guns are silent? His artillery hasn't fired in 2 days, hoarding its last few rounds for the final breakthrough. His prized Panther tanks, the terror of the battlefield, sit idle a few miles back, not knocked out by enemy fire, but abandoned for lack of gasoline. This is the reality of the war in the West. It's a battle of material. The Americans have an air force that never sleeps. If a Sherman tank is destroyed, a new one arrives from a depot within weeks, sometimes days. Radios, essential for command and control, arrive by the crate load. For the Wehrmacht, every loss is permanent. Pilots are rationed flight hours. New tanks are a distant dream. The war has become a contest of production, and Germany is being buried under an avalanche of American steel. And this avalanche isn't just landing in France. Let's cross the map to the Eastern Front, where the Soviet war machine is grinding the Wehrmacht into dust. And what's moving that machine? Look closely at the trucks hauling the fearsome Katyusha rocket launchers. Many of them are American-made Studebakers. The rails and locomotives rebuilding the shattered Soviet supply lines, shipped from factories in Pittsburgh and Detroit. The boots on the feet of the Red Army soldiers, the canned meat that gives them the energy to push forward. All part of the massive Lend-Lease program. American factories are not just supplying one front. They are powering a global war. This overwhelming reality leads to one last desperate gamble, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's plan is not to defeat the Allied armies in a straight fight. He knows that that's impossible. The plan is a bet against American logistics. A daring armored thrust through the snowy forests to split the British and American forces, capture their massive supply dumps, and seize the port of Antwerp. It's a heist. Starve the beast by stealing its food. For a few days, it seems to work. The surprise is total. German panzers, running on fumes, punch through the thin American lines. The snow and fog ground the Allied air forces. Panic ripples through the command. But then, the American logistical giant awakens. Bridges blown by retreating Gs are repaired by engineers overnight in freezing conditions. Replacement tanks and troops held in reserve are rushed to the front by train. Supply depots, the primary targets of the German advance, are simply moved. They are shifted on the strategic map like chess pieces, but these are pieces the Wehrmacht no longer has the strength to take. The German spearhead runs out of gas, just miles from its objective, its supply lines stretch to the breaking point. In a German staff diary from those final weeks, the tone is not one of panic, but of cold, sober realization. An entry reads, "The war has become a battle of depots, and we are running out of them." Spring 1945, the Ruhr pocket. A forest of cold, silent chimneys stands over the ruins of Germany's industrial heartland. Below, tens of thousands of German soldiers, now prisoners, are marched past the dormant factories that were once the engine of their war machine. The air, thick with smoke, carries the scent of defeat. This wasn't just a military collapse. It was an industrial one. Deep beneath a shattered Berlin, in the Vorbunker, a final, stark conversation takes place. Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, delivers a chilling truth to a leader detached from reality. Hitler has ordered a scorched earth policy, demanding the destruction of all remaining German infrastructure. Speer explains the futility of the command. A factory without coal is just a monument. A power plant without fuel is just a building. The order to burn everything down would only prove how little was left to burn. The war wasn't lost on the battlefields of the East or West alone. It was lost here, in the silent, powerless factories. Let's step back from the front lines and look at the ledger, the real story of this war. It wasn't just a story of soldiers. It was a story of systems, of production lines, and of sheer, overwhelming numbers. While Axis Europe struggled to replace its losses, American industry achieved a scale that bordered on the unbelievable. Over the course of the war, the United States produced more than 300,000 aircraft. Think about that, an air force larger than all others combined, built from scratch in just a few years. It churned out nearly 100,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. But the real game-changer was logistics. America built over 2,700 Liberty ships. These weren't sleek warships. They were simple, mass-produced cargo vessels, the workhorses of the Allied supply chain. A new one was launched on average every few days. They carried everything: food to feed Britain, fuel to power the Red Army's tanks, and the immense arsenal that would equip the D-Day landings. They were floating warehouses, connecting the factories of the Midwest to the battlefields of the world. Add to that millions of trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces, and rifles. One nation's factories, organized around standardization and relentless efficiency, had systematically outproduced an entire continent consumed by war. Remember the German generals who, years earlier, had laughed at America's unmilitary society, its focus on consumer goods and comfort? Now some of them sit in POW cages, hearing unbelievable rumors that the factories in Detroit, which had just finished building thousands of bombers, would be converted back to making civilian cars in a matter of months. Others, in their post-war memoirs, would write with a sense of awe and resignation. They admitted they weren't beaten by superior soldiers or grander strategies. They were beaten by enemy machine tools. They were defeated by production schedules, by logistics, by an endless stream of spare parts that kept the Allied war machine running while theirs ground to a halt. The ultimate weapon wasn't a secret rocket or a super heavy tank. It was the assembly line. It was the ability to turn raw materials into overwhelming force, faster and more reliably than the enemy could ever hope to match. It was a victory forged in steel, planned on spreadsheets, and delivered by ordinary people who understood their role in a global struggle. And as the final sirens wind down across the shipyards and the factory floors, a welder pulls off her gloves at the end of her shift. She looks out at the sprawling industrial landscape she helped build, the tools of victory now quiet. The war is almost over. Her war is won. For more untold stories from World War II, where pride met the harsh reality of logistics, and the fates of nations were decided not just by armies, but by factories, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching.